description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
And Atheist, that's Neil deGrasse Tyson, who kicks off our show each Wednesday. A fair comment in light of the fact that he's a scientist, and science, of course, is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world following a systematic methodology based on evidence. So really his stance is totally in line with the claim that there is a God. That's what this podcast is all about. G'day, I'm Peter Rowe. It is a fun name, an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walking to the bar. It's not a joke, but there's a bit of fun we have on the show, so it's great to have you. What we're really talking about and searching for is the evidence that there is a God. I am no more convinced than I was 7 episodes ago. Sorry, guys, to tell you that, but I'm open. I'm open. I was a believer for over 25 years, but something changed me. In the words of Johnny Nash, and I thought about, will I sing it or will I just say it? I'll say it. I can see clearly now. I can see now.
Sing it.
Maybe later. That what I believed was true, and it was something I just wanted to believe was true, and so I did. And when I searched wholeheartedly for proof, there was none to be found. It's certainly not what I was hoping for, but in the end, I had to follow what I believed to be true, and that was that there isn't any evidence or proof that there is a living God as far as I can see. And for thousands of years, people from all walks of life have believed that there was a God for every occasion. They weren't real then, and I can see no evidence to show that they are any more real now. I think mankind has just perpetuated the myth. I think this world would be a much better place without the often warped, judgmental, hate-filled religions of the world. We are taught in most churches these days that we are wicked, we are sinners, we are not worthy, and we were born into sin, and we were told we have to ask God's forgiveness for nothing we have actually done wrong, all on the promise of eternal life when we die. To me, it reads a little bit like a bit of a horror movie, to be honest, not a fun relationship with a loving creator who chooses not to reveal himself to us for thousands of years, remains invisible and silent, and who, it would appear, is either not willing or not able to help us in any way, shape, or form. To argue the case for God, my 2 co-hosts join me every Wednesday, Richard Stills and Luke Feeney. Welcome, guys.
G'day, mate. Good to be here again.
Good evening.
Absolutely. And again, our special guest and my fellow atheist to help me out tonight, Suresh Rajan, mate. Great to have you back again this week. Thanks for coming in.
No, good to be here. Good to be here. Nice to catch up with all of you.
Now, after that very light-hearted start, let's talk about puppy dogs.
Yay!
Ask the most important question of all, and that is, do dogs go to heaven? I reckon it's a great question, especially for you at home. My dog-mad wife, Louise, came up with the idea, if there is a village full of mad dog people, Louise would be queen. No question about that. Loves her dogs. Our onliners, either watching on YouTube or Facebook, broadcasting live on this 31st day of January 2024. It's just after 8 p.m. in Perth, Western Australia, or you may be watching the replay wherever you are in the world. I'm sure it wasn't as hot as it was here in Perth today. Got to about 36, 37 degrees. Amazing. That's Celsius too. Either way, it's great to have you with us tonight. So do you think dogs go to heaven when they die? If you want to comment or share an opinion, please do. Your question will appear on our screen and we can have a chat. Gentlemen, I'll open it up to you. Let's talk about puppy dogs. Luke, you're the Bible teacher. So let's start with you. What does the Bible have to say about heaven and sentient beings?
You know, it'd be convenient if there was like a chapter titled, you know, do dogs go to heaven? And you know, sometimes we tend to treat the Bible as a bit of a reference book and expect there to be, you know, these little headings. modern translations even kind of perpetuate this by adding in little things like, oh yeah, like a little mini summary above that particular paragraph of this is what's going to happen. But no, there really isn't any sort of clear-cut thing. In saying that, you don't need the Bible to clearly say something in a very succinct, neat little line to be able to draw a conclusion about an answer for something like this. And for me, very clearly, the answer would have to be yes. The Bible does talk a great deal about creation, and Paul in particular talks about the renewal of all things. Talks about there's this beautiful line that Paul says that talks about all of creation that groans. All of creation is groaning for redemption. Basically, it's groaning, and all of creation means all of creation. It means animals. It means pets. This is so there is that. There is biblical text, scriptural evidence that you can pull from and say, look, yep, this does support that. There have been arguments made against it in a few different ways around the idea of what a soul is and what a human is and things like that, which we can no doubt talk about in a little bit. But I think even without all of that, if you talk about heaven being, and this is pretty universally agreed upon as Christians when talking about heaven, it is a place where you're fully yourself, where there is no sadness, there is no you are whole, you are perfectly whole, more whole than you've actually ever been in this sort of lifetime. So for me, and as a pet owner, I love pets, I love dogs, and I love all animals. I cannot fathom an afterlife where you've had a relationship and you love a pet, you love an animal, and that's not there because that's almost a part of you. You couldn't be whole without that. So there's a whole logical and I guess a more metaphysical argument to be made, which I'm sure Rich will chime in on a little bit.
Can I ask a question of you, Luke and Rich?
No, sorry, mate. We don't do that. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Just been muted.
Cross-examination. Like it.
Of course, mate.
I'm trying to look at corollaries, say, in Hinduism. Now, in Hinduism, there is a view that animals are God's creations as well. And part of that respect for the animals is provided for by prescribing vegetarianism.
Yeah.
Okay, because it is inappropriate to slaughter the animal because they are one of God's creatures, one of God's creations. So yet Christianity doesn't have that same concept. It actually isn't there also some mention of sacrifices of lambs or animals at some stage in the Bible as well?
There is, and there's probably a couple of parallel things there. Sacrifice, I think, would be a fantastic topic for us to delve into, probably on its own episode. But just to touch on that, there is. But my take on it is it's God meeting man where they're at. In ancient cultures, sacrifice was a big part of many, many different faiths. It's prescribed in the sense of Old Testament law, but it's effectively done away with. It's a progressive revelation that God doesn't actually need that, and it's a fascinating thing. In terms of vegetarianism, it's a great point. It's a really, really good point. In Christianity, it's not pushed in the sense of expounded on as this is our position in regards to what it means to the relationship that we have with animals. In saying that, it's not necessarily an unbiblical position. When you look all the way back in Genesis, the picture of the original creation, the Garden of Eden, being this beautiful mythological story, is really designed to kind of be a picture of the ultimate. and almost what we're working our way back to, in a sense, what it will be again one day. And
Right.
in that picture, there is no Adam and Eve are vegetarians. There is no meat eating. I guess the permission to eat animals happens after a specific event. And I was only just trying to think about it just before we zoomed in because I thought this might come up. And Rich might be able to tell me. I can't remember whether it's after the expulsion in the garden or maybe after the Great Flood, right? It's some big event, and it's after that, only after that, where it's all of a sudden, okay, now things are a bit different because there's already been a corruption, if you will, of the natural order. So there's an argument to be made there. And I think if you think about heaven in the sense of one day everyone being whole and all of creation being whole, well, you can't be whole if you're still in an abattoir, can you? You know, that's not going to fly in heaven. So yeah, there would not. They couldn't both coexist. We couldn't still be, I guess, meat eaters. But yeah, that's it's a really, really good point. Maybe the reason that I haven't pushed harder for it is because I'm a meat eater, and I'd be a raging hypocrite if I didn't give it up and still. But I have the utmost respect for vegetarians.
Which brings me to a pointed question. What'd you have for dinner?
Yeah, exactly. Beef. It was a beef pie. Beef and spinach pie. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We know you'll check yourself. All right, keep going. Gentlemen, you finished, Rich? Luke, or you got more?
I think so. Yeah, I'll defer to Rich. Otherwise, I won't shut up. You know, I need like the Oscars music to chime in and tell me to wind it up.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny when people say, "Does the Bible teach?" Really, the Bible doesn't speak. The Bible doesn't teach. The Bible is literally a text. So the only things that teach and speak are people who are picking up the Bible and saying something from it. So the Bible doesn't do anything. But I grew up in a church where we were told most definitely not. Fido does not go to heaven, and because it's probably. I was trying to track it down, and one source I read, I don't know how correct it is, but it's our friend Augustine, Saint Augustine, who we brought up last week about original sin. I think he was back again talking about how Fido's not going to heaven because of this whole rational beings, rational souls, other things that go to heaven. Therefore, animals don't have a rational soul like a human does. Therefore, they're excluded from heaven, not because the door's shut to them, but because they're just not fit for heaven. They're not made for heaven. So maybe that's where it came from. But certainly, I grew up in a church like that, and you could walk in many, many, many different churches, and you probably won't hear a sermon on it. No, I don't think I ever heard a sermon on it. I think the worst we got was a Sunday school lesson on it, probably. What are you doing teaching kids that their poor pets don't go to heaven? But that's the kind of church I was brought up in. It's like Peter's introduction about it being a bit of a horror movie. People say, well, not my church. Well, maybe not to you because you're an adult who can navigate stuff, but sit into the kids' church, the kids' ministry, see what they're being taught with the ears and the heart of a child, and see whether it's as good as you might think it is. That aside, as Luke was saying, there's plenty. If you want to read the Bible in that kind of way, you probably can pull out half a dozen scriptures about, when you're talking about Revelation, the sort of the end of the age in heaven. It says all creatures in heaven and earth are worshiping God. Well, there has to be creatures on earth and in heaven after the end of age, talking about a heavenly realm. Some people say, no, that's not quite the end of the age. So it's a bit of a long bow as well. But there's all throughout there are a lot of talk about creation, the New Testament especially, the two big ones. All creation groans for the manifestation or the revealing of the sons of God, which is like, without getting too Bible teachy on you, which is basically saying even inanimate creation all the way through to sentient creation are a part of the salvation story. In fact, are somehow locked up in the fullness of what humans are going to be. They're not excluded, but they're actually wrapped up in the same deal. So, you know, again, it's, you don't get the reference that says, oh yeah, you know, Matthew chapter 6 verse 4, thus saith the Lord, dogs do go to heaven. You don't get that, but there is the story, depending on the story that you're telling, there's logical conclusions that if that story is true, therefore this conclusion has to be true. And if you're telling a story that basically says heaven is some sort of disembodied experience where the bliss of the human soul is made full in the presence of God, and it's a disembodied, it's almost like a place that your soul is taken to. You know, I'm thinking all of the Roadrunner cartoons. Every time that poor dude his sort of soul go up to heaven while he's sort of being crushed. If that's your picture of heaven, which many do, okay, yeah, probably dogs aren't going to heaven because they don't have the same kind of soul as us do. But if, like me, you've got a much grander story of what creation, salvation, and the end of times looks like, you sort of go, yeah, that's a natural, in fact, it's an inevitable conclusion.
Yeah, that's right.
But we'll get into that later. But yeah, if you're just going on Bible, you're busy, you're going to have a fight over it. And, you know, Christians are good at having fights over minor issues. So it's probably a good thing to do.
I remember when I was at the Pentecostal church that I went to, it was very much a line that you need to be able to confess that Jesus is Lord in order to be able for that to happen. And a dog can't talk, of course, so that didn't happen. But it actually goes.
That was before TikTok. I've seen heaps of dogs on TikTok.
Our dog mate and it talks all the time. And the problem is us not understanding her. It's not the dog.
There you go.
Yeah.
Communicate. But it even goes right back to Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas, he taught that animals do not have the eternal souls, so they wouldn't be present in the afterlife. So it's
which again, how would you?
Very interesting. I remember a friend of mine years ago used to live in the country. Yeah, I know. He had a horse. And he said, is my horse going to go to heaven? I said, well, no. And he said, why? And I said, well, because he needs to be able to talk. That's what I believed back then. And he went, well, you can stick your religion where it fits. And he was 100%. I mean, for Suresh and I, it's an interesting discussion because we haven't even got to the point of whether there is such a thing as heaven, let alone whether animals go there. And a quick mention too for you cat lovers out there, we're only talking about dogs, but this is for all sentient beings. Cats are not as good as dogs, let's face it. So that's but I'm sure all cats except ours will go to heaven. It's all right.
Can I just throw in a couple of issues from Eastern religions, just in terms of the status of animals? In Islam, for example, the dog is considered to be an unclean animal. And that's purely because the saliva was seen as unclean, and if you were licked by a dog, it was considered to be inappropriate, etc. Now, Islam places a lot of store around cleanliness, and that's the reason why they preclude the eating of the pig, for example.
Yeah.
You know, pork forbidden by that for the very same reason that pigs were considered to be unclean animals. It poses a really interesting problem in a practical capacity, of course, when a number of our taxi drivers are of Islamic faith, and a number of people who are blind have dogs with them and need to get into the car. And the last time one of our disability discrimination commissioners, Graham Innes, came to Perth, he had his dog with him, and he was precluded by 3 taxis from getting into that. If you're going to stop anyone, you do not stop the disability discrimination commissioner. That was a bad choice.
I never thought about that. Does it actually happen? Does it, Suresh? The taxi drivers won't let dogs in their car.
Look, they're not allowed to prevent the dog from getting in, and that's where I had to step in on. I've probably stepped in on about 25 different occasions over the last few years where I've had to negotiate with the taxi drivers and simply say to them, look, the reality is that dog is allowed there by the laws of this country, period. If you don't want a dog in your taxi, then I suggest you probably don't drive a taxi, because that's the practical thing. And I have friends who have dogs who are, Uber drivers won't take them. Uber drivers of Islamic faith, etc. And we have no control over that. Unlike the taxi industry, we don't have that. So, some practical problems. But from the Hindu religion and its perspective, we are prescribed at the very least to be non-beef eaters. But that's from a very practical perspective. The reason why you do not eat the cow is because the cow is, to most people in India, the provider of milk, the provider of food, etc., and all of those things. So, from a very practical perspective, now, Islam and Hinduism also the reason for its vegetarianism as well is not only the status of animals being God's creations, but it's also from a very practical perspective. It was always considered that if there were toxins that were going to be passed to you, it would be passed from an animal. You're not going to get any toxins from vegetables. So from a very practical perspective, keep you healthy, etc., you did not eat meat which could carry, and that's why in Islam they bleed the animal before they slaughter it. The halal butchering is done there so that the blood is taken out, so all the toxins are removed. But in Hinduism, the animals do have a very high status. Elephants and so on are considered to be, used in all of the various ceremonies, etc. So it's quite a different perspective to Christian religions. That there is a status there for these animals.
Interesting. You mentioned about the reason being, of course, that no toxins in vegetables.
Yes.
That was obviously a rule applied back when there were no toxins in plants. You certainly can't make that statement now about
no, that's right.
modern farming. So that's interesting. We do have just a comment, a quick one I want to mention from, I don't know where they are, Mun Yi Pradhan. I think you're probably more likely to be able to get the correct pronunciation of that, Suresh.
I'd probably guess at Munyi Pradhan. Yeah, you did well.
Which very short comment on Facebook. I think Mun is watching, saying, "I hope so," and I gather that's in relation to dogs and sentient beings getting to heaven. So well done, thank you for that. Which reminds me, it's a good time to mention, of course, if you are watching live tonight on YouTube or on Facebook, we would love to hear from you. We can sit here and talk about stuff till the cows come home, but we really want you to be involved. The whole point about this podcast, of course, is that we can connect with you, because the world seems to be made up of 2 types of people, those that believe and those that don't. And the depth of that belief carries over into all sorts of things. One of the subjects I really want to talk about down the track, not for tonight, is, we touched on it when we first started, is the things that we believe in, astrology rather, and stuff like that, and how people run their lives based upon reading their stars. I saw a great post today from Neil deGrasse Tyson, which had from all the star signs all the way down. And I can't remember what it was. said something about nothing's going to happen to you today or whatever based upon your birthday. I'm paraphrasing, but just all the way down for the whole 12. It was fantastic. It's that is something that's very dear to a lot of people. And back in the day, back in my time in radio, when Louise was in radio, the radio station journos would generally make up the stars for the day. There wasn't an astrologer in the radio station, or they didn't necessarily send them in, and they would make them up, and they're all pretty much the same. People go, "Oh my God, that is exactly right. That is, I'm a Leo, and that is you've nailed it in one." Because basically, as human beings, we all have same things in common. They're not very specific. They're generalizations, and people will love it. So that's another thing I would really like to talk about. But please make a comment. We'll see it on our the way we did with Morn just then, and we'd love to have a chat. And also a call out to Accidental Farmer. We think we might have worked out a way you can jump on and talk to us live during this podcast. Accidental Farmer, who's a WA man. We know that because he's on a tractor with a beard. It was a dress up.
Accidentally.
So let's know if you're listening, Accidental Farmer. We'd love to have you on if you're up to it. It'd be nice to actually hear people who are not only watching, but we can talk to them as well. So we did mention this is not just about dogs, of course, getting into heaven. We're talking about all sentient beings, and as Louise, my wife, said, if you couldn't get your animals into heaven, if heaven even exists, she said, why would I want to go there?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if for the argument of heaven existing, let's say for argument's sake it exists, why would you want to go there and not be able to take anything that you love with you other than just, objects? But as far as animals go, what I was thinking about when Suresh was talking then about the ark, and I don't know enough about it to understand whether or not Noah took the animals on the ark for other reason other than to ensure that that's what they to pay the respect of the importance of animals in our lives, obviously to propagate the planet after the floods had dissipated. But I'm just wondering whether or not that is more of significance in the fact that I can't believe I'm talking about the ark. I don't even believe it existed. But for argument's sake, do you know what I mean? The importance of the animals being saved, was that somehow a cryptic message to us that the importance of animals to that nth degree, or am I just reading too much into it?
Look, possibly. I mean, the flood story wouldn't have been it wasn't the first story where animals were an important part of creation. And the Bible's tricky, right? Because people often think that the order that these stories are in the Bible is the order that they came about, or that they were written down, or but it's not. They're all over the place. The order that they're in now was part of the editing process. It's like, oh, well, this is a progression that we have. So it's hard to tell. It's a whole area of scholars to try and work out when these sort of things were, but we have a pretty good idea. And it's safe to say that there were plenty of other stories, probably predating the flood story, that highlighted the importance of animals in creation. But I think for me, the biggest part of it would just be some of these stories are an attempt to try and understand things after the fact, right? It has to be after the fact. So if you're trying to make sense of a world post-flood, and I do think there was a flood, not a global flood. I think in the ancient Near East, in that Mesopotamian region, there was clearly a massive flood, which the author of that original story must have thought was the world, because that was their whole context. You look as far as you can see there and there, that's the world. And yet they're trying to make sense of, well, there was this huge, huge flood event, but there's also animals still around the place. So clearly, their animals survived somehow, but how did they survive? And so this starts to play in. So I think it's probably partly an attempt to explain why there are still animals around. But it's never really been in dispute that God cares for animals. The animals were an important part of creation. One of the very first things when in the Genesis story where it's talking about God creating animals and saying, well, it says that they are good, and even the Adam and Eve are given this purview to look after the animals. Now that language trips people up because some of the translations use words like rule over or dominate the animals, or but and it kind of makes it seem like you can use the animals for your own good, but it really didn't. The Hebrew doesn't connote that at all. It actually speaks more about looking after the animals, taking care of creation, helping creation flourish into all of its good potential, which means looking after animals. So yeah, I think animals have always been important to God, and that's reflected in a lot of stories, including the flood story. Pity it doesn't extend to all the people that were murdered in a mass genocide, but at least a couple of lions and a couple of tigers got on the ark. That's a good thing.
And in the Eastern religions, and we look at religions like Buddhism and Jainism, they take that concept of the importance of those sentient beings and importance of animals to one step further, where Jains, for example, when they walk along, the holy men of the Jain communities, when they walk through the streets of India, there's someone walking in front of them, sweeping the ground so that they do not step on any insects and kill them. So, and they wear a mask so that they do not inhale by accident any of the insects themselves. So they've taken it right to that extent of saying they're a creature of God, and therefore we cannot harm them in any way. So
it reminds me of that beautiful scene in the Brad Pitt movie 7 Years in Tibet, when they're going to build a temple, but they have to clear out all the earthworms before they can lay the foundations. And he's going, "What are you talking about?" And they do. They spend months or whatever on their hands and knees, and but there's a real beauty in that. I think
it's hard not to respect Jainism, I must admit. I mean, it's probably the most passive of all religions. You can't imagine, being involved in a war.
Some holy war,
it's quite fascinating to see how, because of the influences of those sorts of religions on someone like myself. Whereas my wife is very much Australian Catholic, European heritage, so very, she's Russian German background, but very much that strong Catholic traditions. If I find a spider, if I find a cockroach, I will take it outside and leave it out there. I won't kill it. I'll take it out and release it.
Yes.
By the time she's landed the sixth slipper on it, it's got to be killed.
But I think that is very much an Australian one.
I can't bring myself to
isn't
it?
So.
I think actually reminds me of what my father used to do when he was killing cockroaches. He was the same. He'd get his slipper or something and say, "Hey, bug, like God? Go and see God." And he'd smack it. I was like, "Oh." So, I get it.
When we were talking backwards and forwards on Messenger about tonight's subject matter, you did share briefly, and I don't think it's coincidentally, vaguely, about a story connected to a ghost of a dog. Can you elaborate, please? In the words of Paul and Hanson, please explain.
No, so I was sort of goading you there a bit, because I knew I was saying, there's plenty of biblical evidence when there really isn't too much if you read it flat. But I was just trying to up the ante and saying, well, I've seen a ghost dog, therefore they have eternal souls, therefore they're getting into heaven. It's just I was joking but for this reason, it's like a lot of the discussions around this tend to be just somebody's opinion on a very esoteric nature of souls and who has a proper soul. But it fits into a story. And so, if somebody did encounter a ghost dog that was real, then that would sort of upset a whole lot of the apple cart. Yeah, I haven't actually seen any ghost dogs myself. I haven't seen with my eyes any sort of ghosts.
I've been waiting 2 days to hear the story, and there's.
I didn't have one. I didn't have one.
I think more than people being over the top about hearing a dog story, I'd be just as amazed if I actually knew someone who had actually seen what they claimed to be a real ghost, not of a dog, just a ghost. Period.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will. Let's just say the story, because it is a story around that. I was actually in church. One of the leaders in the church, so a lay pastor. I've never actually managed to get anybody to pay me to be a pastor. All my 45 years, I've always just have to do it for free. It was probably the best way to do it, to tell you the truth. So I was a lay leader in a church, and we had an Islander lady in it, which is interesting. So their culture is has a lot of an awareness, I guess, of spirit being pervasive. So it's not an uncommon thing. But she came to I was standing next to the senior pastor, and she was talking about her husband had died about a year earlier, was now appearing to her. So she was in her bed, and she would feel the bed sort of indent, and she knew he was there, and she was troubled by it. And so talking to a pastor, very, very Western, very, although in a Pentecostal church, but very much on the mindset that we've been talking about, probably would agree that dogs don't go to heaven. But his advice was, oh, don't be silly. That's not your husband. If anything, it's a demon. And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
That escalated quickly.
So that's like, oh,
how
okay.
comforting.
Yeah, how comforting. So he did his little bit. I waited till he walked away, and I grabbed her arm, and I said, and Suresh, I think you speak in a very similar way to what my heart was. Is like, whether this is real or not, it's real for her.
Yes.
And so this was my advice. I said to her, look, he was a believer in Jesus. Yes, he was. I said, well, he doesn't need to be troubled and being with you, troubling you. So next time he comes to you, you tell him, we'll just call his name Reg. Say, Reg, just go toward the light, go to Jesus, and he'll take care of you. She comes back the next week. Well, she says, Richard, I did that thing, and he hasn't come back again. He's with Jesus, isn't he? I said, yeah, probably.
Wow.
It's all good. So it's the same sort of thing. There's the actual metaphysical reality of the thing, which I think we know far less than we all pretend to know, even me. And there's the phenomenological, the appearance of it, and that's actually what is real to most people. And calling her poor dead husband phenomena a demon was not very helpful to anybody, and it didn't work. It didn't get rid of the manifestations of this thing for her, but a loving response which said this person belongs in the embrace of infinite love, God himself, was a helpful thing. So I guess the short answer is, I haven't seen a ghost. I know somebody who claimed to help them out. Maybe if anybody's got sort of problems with dog ghosts, because we believe dogs go to heaven, the same sort of way could help them out. But I think that was a story.
Well, it's an interesting discussion, isn't it? If you consider that we are all sentient beings. If people claim that we can become ghosts, are they suggesting that perhaps if a dog has a soul like we do, that there could be? I've never heard anyone talking about. There's no ghost shows on TV tracking down ghosts of dogs. It's interesting. I've never
Yeah,
quite
it's
thought
true.
before. If you're watching and listening now, and you've got a great ghost story, and you want to claim that you've seen a ghost and you've experienced something like this lady that Richard was talking about, I've heard 1,000,001 stories from people that have thought that something had happened. Now, I used to be one of those people that would just say, "No, it doesn't happen. Don't be ridiculous." Now, as I've mellowed in my age, I realise that I don't know whether someone saw a ghost or not. How dare I? How audacious would I be to wipe out saying, you can't see them, they don't exist, get over it? I wouldn't have the faintest idea. How dare I say you don't see ghosts, or you haven't seen, or you haven't been in contact with the dead? There are limitations when you see people clearly faking talking to people on the world tours of getting in contact with dead relatives and bringing them together. There's clear they are charlatans and they're making a lot of money.
Mhm.
But the rest of it, how do we know? We don't know what's going on in the world. It's a crazy place. We can't even agree on whether God's real, whether heaven's real and stuff like that. It's a constant search to try and find the truth. And I sometimes we get closer, sometimes we don't. But if you've got a story, you'd love to tell us about it, jump on and make a comment. If you're watching us on YouTube Live or Facebook, be a part of this amazing podcast talking about incredible things about dogs and all sorts of other sentient beings ending up in heaven with us. Or when a dog dies, does it automatically go to heaven when we're not there? In which case, how does that work?
Well, it waits for you
Sit
At the
and
level.
stay.
in your mansion in the golden streets. No. To be
It's a
fair,
beautiful idea. It is a beautiful idea, as heaven is a beautiful idea. And I would love to think that if I die, I'll go and live forever in this place. And Mabel, the dog's there, and all the people there that I love. Unfortunately, there will be people there that I didn't love, and I so it would be nice to catch up with them again. But it's a beautiful idea, and who knows whether it's real or not? We simply don't. We can hypothesize till the cows come home, and it doesn't necessarily make it any clearer. It's just it's a beautiful thought, and if people want to believe it, I mean, so be it.
You know, I was just thinking about something Suresh said, and I love having him a part of this conversation because he really brings that Eastern point of view. And it really stood out to me. The whole Western conversation tends to be around the metaphysics of the soul being the deciding factor, whereas the East really talks about the conversation's far broader. There's the clean, unclean sort of distinction. Is that a thing going on there, or maybe even like the metaphysics of the soul doesn't really matter. It's a very inclusive view of creation as a bit more of a whole. And I'm going to look it up when you guys have a bit of a talk about, but it's really interesting about bringing those 2 points together. It's something that I think Luke and I have been reading some similar people, but the idea of let's pretend heaven is a place, as if it is a place that a dog goes to and waits for you. Even if that's how it is, I don't believe it is a place in that sense. But even if it was, and going to heaven was the good place, not the bad place, where all the you're made most whole, most complete. You're being embraced in the bliss of God in His presence. Surely going to heaven wouldn't mean that you've got to be less than what you are on earth. And surely on earth, your connections with each other, like, I'll pick the closest one, my wife and kids. The connection with them, it actually defines me. If I had to go to a place where they said Rochelle was not, I'd be less than I am now. And to a lesser degree, I've got 2 little pseudo dogs, I call them. They're it's a multi Shih Tzu and a Shih Tzu, so they're not real dogs, but I guess genetically they purport to be dogs. But I mean, that was one dog's 15 years old. It's gone through all of our memories together, and to go to a place without that dog is like I would not be as whole as I am now. So what does the dogs not going to heaven actually mean about the identity of a human? Are we literally just some disembodied, disconnected essence, or do our connections here on earth in this life actually mean something about who we are? And I think that's a much bigger question. And I think the East is probably more equipped to speak about that from what I've heard from Suresh's discussions.
It's a great contemplation.
Well, can I chime in while Suresh is thinking?
I'm thinking about that. Yes.
Just to piggyback that and just add to that, that very argument has been a thorn in the side of those with a very strict criteria about who's in and who's out. And Peter touched on it earlier around, well, unless you say these magic words, you're not in, and dogs can't say it, horses can't say it. Mr. Ed can, he's definitely in, but other than that, most horses can't. So it's like you then are left in a position where if you're in and your wife's out, or your father or mother is out, or your kids are out, or your neighbor is out, what do you do with that? You suffer incredible grief, but you're not allowed to grieve in heaven. That's one of the things that it does tell us about heaven, is that there is no sadness, there is no tears. It's you are whole, all this sort of stuff. So what do you do with that? And a very flawed but a common answer that elements of the church have provided there has been, well, you will have no memory of that. That part of you is excised from, almost like a spiritual lobotomy, right? So you don't feel the pain of that loss because you don't remember it. But even that, the second you think about that, you go, well, I'm less than. If you were to remove the last 15 years of my memories or life with my wife or the dogs or my kids or whatever, I mean, I'm not the same person. I'm actually a different being, and therefore that doesn't work either. So really, it puts a bit of a thorn in the side for all sorts of conversations around who's in and who's out when it comes down to that. But yeah.
Are we also looking there, Richard and Luca? Are we also looking there at different statuses that animals have? So can a horse is at a higher status than a dog is, or are they? In Hinduism, it is a creature. That's the end of it. It's a creation of God. And therefore, you treat all of them equally, including the insects, etc., etc. But in Christianity, are we almost, are we talking about, dogs fall into the accepted category, what perhaps horses don't? I'm not sure.
Well, flies don't. I'm just saying.
Yes.
Putting it out there. I draw the line.
That's unanimous. Yeah.
We agree on something.
You know what? That's such a good point. And I was thinking about this coming into this conversation. I actually was, because you know what gets me is dogs. It's almost easy because you love dogs, and even if you don't love dogs, you can understand why people would love dogs. It's like, I'm not a cat person, but I understand why people would love their cats and all that sort of stuff. Right? Yeah, that's easy. But then when you get to the botfly, this like parasitic thing that it just doesn't seem like it does anything of beneficial to the world, or like it just seems like it's just this horrible thing that lives horribly and does horrible things to other animals, and it's like, but then you go,
sounds like some people I know.
yeah. But I think that Hinduism way of saying, well, a creature's a creature. I actually think that's the only probable way that you can do it. It's you can't start mucking around with with a hierarchy, you know.
Well, because it doesn't work, because then it brings in all of the horrible animals in the world whose sole purpose is to kill and maim and whatever. I mean, it doesn't look. It's also worthwhile offering the question, particularly to our two Christian learned friends here: is it possible that there is no heaven, not for people, not for dogs? The reason why we meld so well with dogs and other animals, because we are just a part of a species. We're higher up the chain than what they are, but we are all connected together as beings on this planet. And the natural, of course, the natural thing that would happen with dogs, cats, and those animals that have been domesticated over a long period of time, they would just be a part of our families. And we don't necessarily need to read any more into it than that as an option. It is an option. All of the options we have in front of us about dogs, cats, all of us, whether we go, whether we don't go, whether we know or whether we don't know. At the end of the day, it is just simply a belief that we want to believe in, that we believe it is true or it's not true. There's no proof. There's no way we can prove it. There has been few people in the past who have claimed they have died and gone to heaven and seen what it was like and then have come back. They probably would have a great conversation with those people who have been abducted by aliens as well. It's the same kind of thing. In its simplest form, as beings on this planet, it is very possible. It's, from my perspective, certainly probable, until I see evidence to counter that, is that there is no such thing as heaven. And so we're not going there, and the animals aren't going there either, because it just simply doesn't exist as much as we would like it to.
I think, I mean, we couldn't have an intelligent we couldn't have an intelligent conversation without acknowledging that that's a possibility. I think anyone who's genuinely wrestled with their faith, and I think the term Rich used last week was has an examined faith, has to have examined the fact that that's a possibility. But in saying that, it's also a possibility that it's real. Yeah, equally so. And for me, as a Christian, I can't get away from the fact that I read these accounts of Jesus and I take stock of what he says. And Jesus seems to talk a lot about a concrete reality called heaven. Now, not so much in the disembodied soul going up and floating on a cloud playing harps sort of escapist view of heaven, but in the sense of very much a reality where God's will and his creation on earth are molded, right? And I think, so for me, I live out of that space. I choose to believe in that possibility, whilst acknowledging that there's a possibility that there is nothing after the end. But I'm going to live my life as if there is, but not in the sense of escaping it to go there one day and just hanging around waiting to die and then go actually start my life in eternity. But I prefer the view, and this is the view that Jesus seemed to espouse, is that the end game is not us going to heaven up there somewhere, but in heaven coming down to earth and there being actual heaven on earth. It's a melding of that, a return to that original state of creation where God's will, creation is in perfect harmony, and that creation within itself is in perfect harmony. Yes, amongst animals, amongst people. I know idealist, and we've spoken about that before, Peter, where it doesn't seem like that's ever likely to happen, but the belief, my belief at least, is that it can and it will, and we can play a role in bringing that about, no matter how unlikely it might seem. So, but there's this weird in between, right? There's this weird in between of, well, okay, before heaven is totally enmeshed with earth, heaven on earth, this ultimate reality that Jesus is speaking about. So what happens before that happens, even if that's an inevitability and that's all going to, like, what happens in the meantime when we pass away? And the Bible doesn't really talk a lot about that. it talks a lot about new creation and the new Jerusalem and heaven on earth and stuff as this ultimate reality. But that in between period, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about what happens after we die, because it's hard to imagine that end reality. It doesn't really give us a lot of details, but I think it's I can't imagine it not being with creation. There's a reason that animals were created, and if you look at some of the animals on this earth, they are phenomenally beautiful. There are insects and animals that we haven't even discovered yet that are the most intricately beautiful thing that no humans have ever laid eyes on, and they're just there because of the love of God creating this incredible thing for its own sake, for its own beauty, not for us to just look at it or whatever. I can't imagine a creator going to all that effort and doing that, and then them not being important enough to be part of this heaven, to be part of the kingdom of God, this ultimate reality of creation. It doesn't make sense. And it'd be quite boring without your dogs running around at your feet or your cat's giving you the cold shoulder or any of that sort of stuff. I mean, that's part of the beauty of creation. Why would you not have that? So it doesn't, that's sort of how I wrestle with it.
Suresh is deep in thought about to come out with something absolutely profound.
Mic drop moment.
And just coming back to that status of animals in some of the Eastern religions. Now, given that we don't believe in heaven or hell, we actually have a hierarchy of reincarnation. So animals can be reincarnated as humans, and humans can be reincarnated as animals. So our statuses are, you start with the gods, so that's the highest level that you can aspire to. Then you have a whole series of demigods, and then humans, and then animals, and then there's a hungry ghost and a hell creature. So you don't want to be a hell creature or a hungry ghost, but the animal has enough status to be accepted as being something that you could be reincarnated as. So, it's accepting, yes, it's accepting that animals do have a soul in the Hindu philosophy and Hindu religion. So it's an interesting contrast to the view, as you were saying earlier, Peter, if you don't have a soul, or you can't speak, or you can't confess to sins, you cannot go to this mythical place called heaven. Well, we don't have to come back into heaven. We're just going to come back in a higher form or lower form, depending on our deeds during our current life. So so the animals do have a status, I guess, is much more so than in Western religions, a recognized separate status.
We have a discontinuity between humans and animals, whereas yours is very much, it's just a scale. We have like animal gap people. Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it's not a coincidence that most religions, if not all, without looking into them too far, that there's this desire to keep on living, be it through reincarnation, be it a heaven. Which it's a fairly natural thing, and I think as you get older and you get closer to the end of the line, these are the things that you think about. Well, certainly I do. And I remember when my dad died, probably 12 or 13 years ago. The thing that freaked me out most, that disturbed me and upset me most, was that I just thought my dad would never die. It wasn't even an option. My dad would just always be there. And the next minute, I remember going in his bedroom. He just laid down for an afternoon rest and didn't wake up. And I went and sat down on his bed and looked at him. I said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? This is not the way this movie is supposed to end. Why are you not Why are you not speaking to me? Why are you ignoring me? Why? And I just could not wrap my head around the fact that there was an end. I'd never considered an end. That was never an option. And there it was. And as I get older, I'm not close to his age, which he passed, but I'm getting there very rapidly as time flies past for us all. And it's you start thinking about these things, and you start thinking about, well, okay, well, there's a time in my life for 25 years I actually believed in a heaven, and that was very peaceful. It was a beautiful thought. No matter how much my life might suck on earth, I've got something really, really nice to happen. And then you grapple with that, and you look for evidence, and you look at all the things that I went through, which convinced me that what I was believing in was just, all religions man-made. There's no question of that in my mind. And we all have the same desire to continue living. We don't want to die. No one wants to die. Well, that's a silly thing to say. Of course, some people do want to die, but you want to go on living, and heaven keeps you living. Reincarnation keeps you living. It's all of the options. But you've got to get to the point where you go, if any of these things were true, isn't there any way that you could find out? In Hinduism, for instance, have you ever met anyone, or Suresh, that's claimed that they had prior lives? I know there's comical shows made about it all the time. You have a dress-up party for people who have been reincarnated. There's always about 13 Napoleons rock up. They're never reincarnated from a homeless person or a murderer. They're always some person of status that they came back as, some glamorous model or some, mystical leader or something. Do you know anyone who shared stories with you convincingly that they know where they came from?
Well, my philosophy around that is very similar to what Richard was talking about earlier. If it provides comfort to them that they are going to be reincarnated, then it's not for me to dash that belief. It's not for me to challenge that belief. That's what provides them the comfort that they're going to do the right thing by everyone. They'll come back in a higher form, or their father passed away and their father was a beautiful person, and they expect that their father is now somewhere up there in a higher form, in a demigod or god form. And they gain, and I watched my mother as she farewelled my dad by us releasing his ashes in the rivers close to his home in India. And as I said before, for the whole year that we had the ashes sitting at home, she was never able to speak about Dad. All of a sudden, when we let him go on his journey, all of a sudden she recalled all of those fun things that he did, all of the quirky things that he did. And I just saw the comfort that it gave her. And I just suddenly thought, wow, that's really important for her to believe that. And I want her to believe that. And I want, whether I believe it or not, it's another issue. But, it gave, and I think Richard was touching on that earlier when you said that hell is this almost a mythical concept that is individualized. I believe in my version of heaven, or, as opposed to someone else's version. So if that's what gives you the comfort, then great. That's your vision of heaven.
Sure. Yeah.
So I choose not to believe, but I think I said right at the very start, I'm not an anti-theist. I'm an atheist, not an anti-theist. So for someone else, I'll defend their right to believe. I'll defend their right to practice their religion. I just choose not to do it myself. That's all. So,
yes, it's a very comforting way of looking at it. It's I do admire that. I can't share the same principles, and I do in principle, but it's a you seem to have mastered the art of acceptance more than what I have, perhaps. But we've also travelled very different roads.
Mm.
In being in this system for 25 years, which is a hell of a long time, and then suddenly to stop that, and it's almost like the inertia keeps you going in that direction, and you're trying to stop going, hang on a minute, I don't believe that anymore. And this is why this podcast was such a not a healing idea, but an idea and a concept which I thought would do amazing things, and I haven't been disappointed so far. It's very interesting to be able to go through that and then come up against two people who shared what I shared, but I'm not with them, but I am with them. And then someone like yourself comes along who shares that. It's quite an enlightening and very, very strange experience, but one that I'm absolutely delighted with it, where it's going.
Can I
Peter,
ask a question about your faith there, Peter? Was it very, very very strong faith and so on? Were you a very devoutly practicing Christian?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the first thing I did when I became a Christian, I actually spent 7 years at Sunshine FM as a broadcaster. And I was wow. I mean, I overnight I stopped drinking, stopped smoking, stopped swearing, stopped everything. I lived the clean life. My conversion was incredibly emotionally charged and dramatic, and it was phenomenal. And I will, when we get some more time, I'll actually tell you what I went through as a conversion to Christianity. It was quite amazing as a testimonial. So yes, my faith could not be shaken by anyone or anything or any. If I'd have met me as an atheist, as a Christian, I would have hated what I was saying and what I was doing. I'm sold on whatever it is that I believe in. I was nothing worse than a conformed smoker or a conformed Christian. I'm discovering it's but yeah, look, completely unshakable. And so it wasn't something I changed overnight, and it wasn't something I wanted to happen. It's like when you're told something that you can't believe in because it's just crazy. Someone tells you that you just saw a purple donkey, and you go, well, I know you didn't. Yeah, I did. No, you didn't. Well, I know you didn't because they don't exist. You can't then convince that person to believe in the purple donkey because it's absurd and you can't see it. It can't be proven. So you have no choice but to go, well, I can't believe in something that you can't prove to me exists. I can't see it. I'm sorry, I'm done. That's what it was like. I didn't want it to happen. I didn't want to stop believing. I didn't want to not believe, but I had no choice but to follow what I could see and what I could feel and what was true to me, to the inner me that experienced the relationship with God. It was just gone, and there it is. So what do? I tried to get it back. I've said to God a number of times, you know what it would take for me to believe in you. If you're God, then you would know what would convince me of your existence. So go for it. I'm open. I'm willing. And obviously nothing has happened, and I don't think it will because I don't think it's real. And if it is, I will stand corrected.
That's episode 462.
Peter's reconversion.
Couldn't help that.
I'm not sure how to take that, Rich. I'll think about it.
I don't know. That's a long time away if we're doing only one a week.
Yes.
That actually just means you're going to live a long time. But I was going to ask a question though. Just the differences, I guess. But you're saying the acceptance that Suresh has in that sort of thing, and you're not being there. Is it because and I'm speaking out of my experience, so it might be similar to you. Is it because that this thing about heaven, hell, dogs going to heaven, all of this sort of these sort of discussions in our shared background of Christianity wasn't primarily a thing that was comforting and life affirming that Suresh saw in his mother, helped her to get over, move forward, embrace, and keep going forward. For you, did you have an experience? It's more used as a I'm in, you're out, and a power thing. It's like you got to believe this because I'm right. I'm running this church, and I set how you can stay in or not. Is that maybe some of the dynamic going on?
Absolutely not. Not all of it. And to be honest, it's quite difficult for me to remember really what I was like and what it was like. It seems like a lifetime ago, and it was. It's been like 11 or 12 years since I was out of it. So it's really hard to remember the intricacies, to put myself back there and think about how I felt. Certainly when I which I alluded to, like a reformed smoker, when I converted, then everyone had to convert because I'm right. And it's true. And you're wrong, which is why I said if it came face to face with me as an atheist, I would have hated the way I was acting, and because there's no I'm right. That's all the way I've discovered the truth. You need to discover it as well. And when you don't want to listen to my argument, then I don't like you. That's not who I want you to be. I want you to. So it was very much. I don't think it was not a power thing per se. It was not. I had to think that I used the power. I used what I thought was the truth and the excitement that enveloped me when I was talking about it and wanting to share it. Okay? It was a matter of sharing. I'm one of those people. If I hear a song that I love, I want to turn it up loud so everyone can hear it. Not because I want them to do anything other than to just enjoy it the way I'm enjoying it. It drives my wife crazy and my kids as well. But that's idiosyncrasies that is frustrating. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It's really hard to remember the actual dynamic. I cannot imagine that was me.
No, not you at all. Yeah, no. Similar to me. You had a good thing going. You want everybody to get on the train. Yeah, exactly.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Come on.
And the lead singer in a big Perth band and all of that stuff that goes with it. And then suddenly, bang, this happened and go, what? This is bizarre. Lived a clean life for all of that time and then just jumped out of it and pretty much got back into who I was before. It's a bizarre, it's like 2 or 3 different people in the one, without being schizophrenic, but in that change of what you see as norm and making up who you are suddenly disappears, and then you discover that person again, but you can't be how I was before because there was 25 years of all this other stuff which is in there. That stuff's indelibly stamped on my heart. I can't just get rid of it like I didn't experience a relationship with God. It's just not gone. It's still there. It's crazy. I've got some recordings done that I back in the 80s that when I was writing songs about Jesus all the time, and I recorded them in a studio, and I got them remastered after not hearing them for 40 years and sat down and listened to them. And I was crying my eyes out listening to this stuff. You could feel the love that I had in these songs for God. And so that's gone, but it's not gone. Do you know what I mean? It's really, it's quite a,
maybe,
sorry.
Maybe that's maybe God feels like he doesn't need to give you a burning bush moment because that's not gone. That's it. Like you said, it's indelibly in your heart. It's that experience.
Of what was though, and it's not there now. I'm living on the memories of when I hear a song that I've written. It's something that I wrote then. Luke, if I thought that there was some element of love or whatever in there, I can't buy the whole package. The whole package just makes no sense to me whatsoever. Which is
it does sound like, and I think a trap that sadly a lot of spaces in the church does tend to do is you get someone that has this encounter with God, and they want to know more about it. They want to get involved in the church, and the message seems to be completely disconnect from who you are or from your old self or whatever. You're a new person, and yeah, in a sense you are a new creation. I believe in that, but maybe not in the way that we tend to do. We tend to say, well, here's a cookie cutter. This is the cookie cutter Christian image or body or way of being in the world that you now have to embody, and everything else is now gone. And that can cause a lot of damage, right? Because like you said, that's part of you. Are there some stuff in us that would be better off if we left behind? Sure, but that's not necessarily just a Christian thing. You can just grow up in some spaces and just be like, oh yeah, I used to do this. I don't really want to do that anymore. That's not again, it's not an exclusively Christian thing, but there are also elements of us that we should be retaining, that we should be, that are who we are. It can be very, very disorienting to try and say, and sadly, some theology, I don't think it would have been where you were from what we've chatted, but some of the more hardcore Calvinist type denominations can just be, very violently, you are a worm, you are worthless, you are horrific, you are an abomination, and now you're slightly better, but you're still an abomination. You're just, whatever. It's and you just. My gosh, you cringe. It's sad, right?
It is. It's horrible.
I think the church needs to do a lot better than that, and that's a big part of it.
It's exactly what I felt like when I did join the church. That no one was the slightest bit interested in what I'd come from. It's just, you're here now. This is what it is. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Just this is be the new person without really understanding just how unbelievably difficult it was. It's like going to a school as a kid, changing schools, and no one bothered to explaining to you where the classroom was and where the teachers were and where you're supposed to go and all of that. That's what it's like. You feel just like a child taken out of this your life and put into this other environment, and then you're looking around going, well, I don't know, how the hell do I do this? What is this?
Can I recommend, Peter?
Yes.
When you've got some time, Pete, pick up a book by a lady who now lives in Bull Creek,
Right.
born in Amsterdam. Carla Van Ray is her name. Carla, age of 18, went into a convent to devote her life to God. And then, so she was a child. She'd been badly abused as a child and all she wanted to do was survive. Natural flow of things, ended up in the convent. The nunnery provided this refuge from the outside world. She hoped to find some love and understanding, exactly what you were talking about there. Instead, she became caught up in all of the regulations that went and drove her almost to the brink of madness. And she finally quit the place, released from her vows, and went back into the real world. Hasty marriage, ended up with a child on her own, a daughter to support, and she turned to the one profession that she knew would sustain her. She became a call girl. She wrote a book called God's Call Girl, and she goes through the whole experience. I actually caught up with her and interviewed her when I first came across her a good 10 years ago. Lives in Bull Creek, came out and had a long conversation. It's a fascinating book to read, but it documents a lot of what. Yeah, sorry.
So I said it sounds fascinating.
Look, it documents a lot of what you've gone through there, just in terms of going through that space in the convent, but not getting the love, the attention, all of that you were looking for as well, and then she left that, and so she's gone from one extreme to the other. But well,
it was for a large part of being involved in the church. There was this part of me that just wanted to get the hell out of it and be the person. The very first time I walked into a church, I looked around and went, "This is not who I am. This is not where I want to be. These people are not who I know. Everyone's pretending to be part of a big loving family. They're dressed up to in the nines in the church, and it's all about how good I look. And I thought, I do not want to be here. How I stuck with it for so long. I eventually went from church to church to church and found out they were all pretty much the same. So we ended up having a home church where we can just actually be human and just worship without all the bullshit that went with it. And that was fabulous. That also drew me closer to being who I was before and how much I just wanted to be who I was before, but believe in God and realised, of course, I didn't need to go to church. I didn't need to read the Bible. I just needed to have a relationship with God, and that was okay. But then that eventually just dissipated. We ended up back at a big church in Vic Park. These guys will know which one it was. It was Raymond back in the day. And I wanted to be who I was, and the church never ever, no matter how many churches I went to, was never full of people anything like me. I'm not saying I was weird or strange or unique. It's you walking through the front door and you switch off whoever you were and you just become this model Christian person, and it's such a fake, ridiculous relationship, which then I got to realize probably why it's so fake is because I think everything that goes with it is just man-made, fake.
Is there an element of being unsafe in a sense? It's like it's not safe for me to be who I am, to have the conversations I want to have, to whatever, to actually have the interest that I, to step outside of this cookie cutter mold.
Yes.
It's just, the thing that drives me.
It's a good question, Luke.
Yeah. And I mean, the genesis of this podcast has almost come from that, right? And we've spoken in the past saying,
of course,
these environments where it's safe to have conversations like this, where there's no boundaries and you can actually be open and wrestle with some big stuff. Yeah. So that's got to extend beyond just questions, right? To actually the core of who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the first time, what are we up to, 8 episodes now? And this is stuff that we haven't talked about. And I was hoping that we would, simply because the people watching, instead of just being 4 cutouts of people, we are all who we are that have brought us here to be able to discuss. And I'm a very open person. There's nothing I won't talk about in my life. And I think that's important. I think it's a connection. It's something I learned in radio, of in engaging in that one person and them feeling like I'm their friend and we connect. And my retirement proved that what I'd done had been incredibly rewarding and impacted on thousands of people, and it was amazing. I find it very difficult to be that same person on this podcast, because one of the great things I loved about radio is the anonymity. This is the complete antithesis of not wanting to be seen. So it's challenging, but it's getting better and better as we go on. I'm getting more and more comfortable, and I think that my story, my journey, is also one that would impact on a lot of people out there who are going through the same thing. That's the main thing, driving force to do this, was so that people out there would understand that you can actually get out of it. If you're having doubts and questions, you're not comfortable where you're at, great, talk to us. We'll help you through and get you to understand. You're not a freak. You're not weak. You're not some backslider, which is a classic term that churches use to absolutely berate people. You don't worry about it, mate. You're just backsliding.
It's abuse.
Yeah, of course it is. I remember when I decided to leave, and one of the pastors, one of about 6 that was at this big church, said, you can't go. What do you mean you're leaving? I said, I'm done. I don't want to be here anymore. He said, you can't leave. And I said, why? And he said, because you're part of our flock. You can't leave. And I said, thank you. You've just confirmed why I wanted to leave. Goodbye. And just walked out and never went back. You can't leave. This was the stuff that started eating away at me in church. Going, you actually believe that. You actually think that that's something that you can say to me. You are so far away from what this is all supposed to be about. So yeah, I mean,
Did you say flock off? Sorry. I couldn't let it slide. I sat on it for a while.
Why didn't you tell me that 26 years ago?
He drives down there now. You remember?
Remember me? Yeah. No, look, it's an extraordinary experience. It's great to be able to talk about it and have a laugh, and we'll see where we go with this.
Yeah.
What are we still time? I've still got a few minutes left, so anyone else want to talk about?
I did have some. I did want to throw back to something that you said earlier, and it just got my mind kind of working, which is a rare thing to happen. Was when you said that someone told you about the dogs can't go to heaven because they can't speak, so they can't say the prayer to declare faith in Jesus, which is what gets them the ticket to heaven, right?
Which is a real literal interpretation of what being saved is all about. And
it is.
Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, you can't just pray. You have to say it in an exact order in order for it to happen. And I'm stupid enough to believe that. So yeah, go on.
I mean, but it sounds like it would be one of those ultra fundamentalist interpretations that you don't really see in the real world. You just see in these weird pockets.
Yes.
But sadly, it's not. It's very prevalent. It's very prevalent in particularly in evangelical circles. And look, you can debunk it in about 4 seconds. That's, I won't even bother. If someone's interested, send me a message. I'm happy to do that. I don't want to waste time here, but suffice it to say, that's not what salvation is. It's more far more than that. But this is, for me, is a prime example. This is what got me thinking around. We have developed these doctrines and these ideas and say, well, this is the mechanism of how something works. And then we just leave it at that, without ever actually following that thread through to say, okay, so if this is something that I apparently believe, to the point where I'm telling someone, sorry, your dog's not going to be in heaven, Fido's gone because he doesn't have a voice box or whatever. It's you think, well, what does that mean for someone with a special needs child who's non-verbal?
Exactly.
Yes. What does that mean for someone who's deaf? What does it mean for there are so many examples where this becomes an unimaginable problem and potentially an extremely, extremely traumatic and hurtful theology for someone to be taught and to believe. If they have someone in their life like that they now think is destined for a hell of eternal conscious torment because they're likely going to be taught that same sort of theology around a hell of eternal conscious torment, which is also crap. But I just think this is a great example of us being able to go, well, but why would we not? When we're talking about things that are this important and we're in positions of authority and we're teaching and, like people are coming to us and they're asking questions, and as a pastor, I'm not in a current pastoring position, but having been in that position, I feel that burden of, my goodness, you could not, unless you've thought something through and really wrestled with it, how are you then speaking that into people and causing this incredible harm? That's unbelievable. And if we're going to put, they come up with all sorts of asterisks, right? It's like, oh, well, if there's intellectual disabilities or if there's this or that, then, God's going to go easy on them. Or the classic one is kids, right? For people who believe in a hell of eternal conscious torment and someone's in, someone's out, you get to this thing of kids. Well, kids are kids. They do stupid crap all the time. My 3-year-old the other day stabbed me, like 2 days ago, stabbed me in the ears with some plastic scissors. I had to go to the doctor. It started bleeding. It was horrific. It was like I just screamed, and then she screamed because she thought she was in trouble. And so I'm bleeding out my ear, and I'm trying to explain to her, it's okay, you're not in trouble. Daddy's just really hurt. I've got to get to a doctor. It's all fine. But Yeah, they do stupid stuff. They don't get it, and we know that. So we know that they're not going to go to hell because they have done kid stuff. But then when does that stop, right? So then we develop crazy things like the age of accountability, and it'll differ. It'll be like, oh, well, once you turn 12, then you should know better. And none of that's in the Bible. None of that's anywhere. That's just us having painted ourselves into a corner and then trying to, oh, I didn't really think about that. Well, maybe this. And look, what if we stop painting ourselves into a corner and we just openly said, let's think about this, let's wrestle with it, let's just be open, and if we don't know, say we don't know, and live in a better way than just saying, well, it's got to be this, and then causing all of this pain and harm to people that end up either severely traumatized and stuck in a church, or the better option, leaving the church and not even wanting anything to do with God. And I say the better option, I say that as a Christian. I hate the thought of someone not wanting to have anything to do with God. But if that means they're no longer in a harmful situation and being spiritually abused in a church environment, that is the better option for them to leave. So you just go, this stuff, it really gets me. And that's why these conversations, I think, are so important, because I just pray, there could be people listening that get some sort of healing, or at least a sense that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is nuance, there is gray in this stuff, isn't black and white. And it's okay to have these conversations and to explore this sort of stuff, because, just because we say some crap, pastors and churches and ministers and leaders, and sometimes it's never malicious. It's almost never malicious, but it doesn't stop it from being harmful.
Yeah,
and we need to recognize that.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Hey, let me spend 5 minutes here, and it's for a reason, because we've been talking about one mode of navigating through this question in Christianity, which is fairly majority. It's fairly long-standing. Like, they've been talking about this since Thomas Aquinas, etc. In my readings, I've come across one of the church fathers, Maximus the Confessor. So he's like right back in the beginning. So this is early Christianity. And he's also, he's like one of the saints of the church. So he's not like some obscure person. They're like, well, don't listen to him. They have feasts and they celebrate him. They read his stuff. He actually helped kickstart some of the theology in the East wing of the church. So Maximus the Confessor, I'm not no expert, but I've been listening to a bunch of experts on him about this question. Like, if we talk to a really modern evangelical Christian, it's like, say the prayer, say the words, because if you say the words, when you die, you get to go to a place called heaven. If you don't, you get to go to a place called hell. And that's pretty much the entirety of the story. And you go all the way back and you read the early Christians, like one of this guys, Maximus the Confessor. And this is the story he tells about this. There's a few things he'll say is that creation, he wouldn't even say creation. He would say we're not even created yet, because to be created is to have the divine image imprinted on everything that is. And when it's like that, you fully know and are embraced in the divine. So you are actually, what they used to call is theosis or divinization. You become, in a sense, God. In the sense, in the New Testament talks about it. They say in Peter, we share in the divine nature. It's that kind of language. He says, well, if that's to be fully created, we're not fully created. And so they talked about creation being a process, and we're in the very early stages of it, where there's volumes and volumes and volumes he wrote and written about him. But essentially the story looks something like this. God planted seeds of himself, of the divine order that becomes, especially rational creatures, they have potential to grow, and we see that in the physical realm through evolution, but the idea is this unfolding creation that is heading somewhere and is not yet fully created. So we're in the early stages of becoming created. And in the middle of it, Jesus appears and connects these two realms together. And we're like, okay. But the idea is in Christian theology, when they really wrestle with the idea of what it means that God took however thousands to millions of years to actually appear on the scene like that, what does that actually mean? And what Maximus the Confessor, he says, well, what it really means is one day, all our talk about the body of Christ, the full creation, the new creation, means that we're not yet created, we're not yet born, we're on the process of doing it. And in fact, to talk about the body of Christ is not to talk about a group of people who have said the prayer and are going to get to heaven one day, but to talk about the body of Christ is to talk about the fulfillment of creation, all of creation, dogs, cats, mice, everything in between, from the tsetse fly all the way up, perfected, whole. That is what it means when Christians talk about the body of Christ, is the full creation enfolded in the divine image, enwrapped in love, fully created, fully born, fully human, fully created. And you read some of the stuff and it sounds mind-blowing. It sounds like, when you first read it, and some people who might even watch this afterwards, especially you poor people who might have grown up in a Calvinist church, this might sound absolute heresy and not Christian at all. Yet the person writing this is the earliest Christians. This is early Christianity. This is biblical Christianity. So you can say it's not Christian, but then you've just got to conclude that Christianity is only a few hundred years old, not a few thousand years old. And it was invented by some dude in Europe, not Jesus Christ and his followers. But so there's the story of Christianity that is told in the ancient East that is far more expansive. And when you're in that kind of thing where the body of Christ is all of creation fully formed, it means we're not yet created, we're being created. And then the question of, do dogs go to heaven, is like, that's not even a question.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
It is the real question is, when are we going to be fully enfolded in our full creation? And one of the things people say, oh, that's just a minority report. That's one guy. Another famous guy, Irenaeus, he was on his way to be martyred. And he writes, the bishop.
Did he have he had an appointment?
Yeah, he writes. Yeah. Thanks. He writes to his church. He says, don't do anything to prevent my martyrdom. Why? Because, and in the shorthand of it is, I'm the pangs of my birth are upon me. Don't prevent my death, because now I am on the verge of being fully created, and one day I will be human. He saw that his death was the next step to his fullness. This is the bishop of the church in that region, establishing Christian doctrine that we live off now, was saying, we're not created. I'm not even born. I'm not even human yet. I'm on my way. And so there's this much grander story where Jesus didn't come as plan B because we messed up stuff, and he's got to rescue us so we can go live in some, airy fairy arty-farty place. No, this was the plan all along, to create something out of nothing, to plant the seeds of divine order that can freely choose its way to fullness, is what we see reflected in natural order through evolution, and is a far grander story of what's going on. And it's a way of being Christian. Sure, there's been other stories, but for people who've had one story of what it meant to be Christian, a very anemic, sort of watery, very modern, very minimalistic, very them and us, very, very cut down version. If that's not working for you, there are bigger stories and better ways of being Christian. In fact, more ancient, more full, more exciting ways of being Christian. So even if the story's not working for you, examine it, look at it, and as I say, you might end up leaving the church because that's the healthy place to be. You might be like Peter and Suresh, who've honestly looked at stuff and concluded, now this is how it is. That's you're right as a human being, but it's not the only way. There's many ways of being human in this world in a very good way. And the little story of the church that says, if you leave us, you leave God, they are lying to you. There's much, God is much bigger than the little church who's you grew up in. There's many better ways, fully human, that may end up leaving the church, but you don't need to. You can leave the bad story and still remain a Christian, which is where I've ended. So that's my story. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. If you're interested into it, I've completely butchered poor Maximus the Confessor's theology. But don't go and read Maximus the Confessor because it's incomprehensible. Go to YouTube, put Maximus the Confessor and listen to some of these guys. There's fascinating Christian theology that we didn't hear about in our Sunday school. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah.
This message was brought to you by your local ecumenical church.
And if you've just joined us, yes, there are atheists here. It's just the believers having his rant.
Please take in everything that Richard said, or consider actually just being an atheist. It's far simpler.
But Peter, then you'd be wrong. So
Pros and cons.
An atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. There you go. That's this particular edition, episode 8. Episode 9 next week will be on Wednesday, the 7th of February. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. If you are watching this as a replay, I don't know what that means. You missed out the live version, but that's okay. Accidental Farmer, we don't know where you are, brother, but you've let us down tonight, so we invite you back. So Suresh, Rich, and Luke, thanks so much for joining us tonight and talking about puppy dogs and all sorts of interesting things. We don't know what we're going to talk about next Wednesday night. We'll come up with a doozy, and hope you can all join us then, which will be 8 o'clock next Wednesday, the 7th of February. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I bid you a farewell.
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
See you, legends.